Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Caroline, let's talk about what's going on, and it's great to be here with you. I'm such a tremendous admirer of the work that you're doing and your courage to be able to speak out and call things out, call people out that are involved in this nefarious activity that's going on within our administration. I mean, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. We're looking at the universities are exploding with Jew hatred. Our government can't seem to figure out what side of the war it's going to be on. Are we going to fund the Iranians? Are we going to deny weapons to Israel, our friend and ally? And I feel like there's something going on below the surface that as Americans and really as Westerners across the globe, they don't know the rest of the story, what's really going on. It's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde going on here. So tell us a little bit about, after October 7th, which was horrible, this the modern day Holocaust. And here we are thinking that our government, and as Americans, we have this image of our country that we care about the underdog. We're going to stand with Israel. This is outrageous what happened to these atrocities that happened against the Jews, and we're gonna stand with Israel and let Israel deal with the problem. But it seems like we keep waffling. What's going on within the administration, the Biden administration? Because we can't seem to figure out what's happening.
So those are all really good questions. First of all, I just want to start by saying welcome to Jerusalem. It's great to have you back here in Israel again. You're a true friend of Israel, and we really appreciate everything that you do for the Jewish state. It's a tremendous privilege to count you among our friends. So thank you very much, Laurie, and God bless you. Look, we've been facing the situation with the administration since October 7th, where they give us a big hug, but it works out that it's a bear hug because Joe Biden, the president, came here on October 19th, and he gave a speech that was incredibly empathetic, and he met with hostages' families, and a lot of hugging. And the Israeli people were really moved by that. You have to understand that in the immediate wake, and even now to a certain degree, in the immediate wake of October 7th, we were a nation in total trauma. We were all stunned, shocked, and almost speechless by the dimensions of the atrocities and the sadism that was such a prominent characteristic of everything that Hamas and really thousands of Palestinians from Gaza who joined them perpetrated against our people, against children and old people, Holocaust survivors, babies, families. That having the president of the United States come like that and give this embrace of the Jews was very meaningful. The problem that we faced with him already from the very outset was that while he was extremely emotional and empathetic, his policies were extremely hostile. So, for instance, in the speech that he gave us on October 19th when he was here in Israel, he hectored us about abiding by the laws of war, something that Israel does as a matter of course. And it was sort of, the popular term now was gaslighting. It was accusing us of doing something that we weren't doing by insinuating that we mustn't do something that we had no intention of doing. And so, you prove that you're innocent now. We're telling you not to be a criminal anymore, but we never were. So that was the first thing that was a real warning light. And in fact, he did that for the first time already on October 9th, and Secretary of State Blinken also did. And then the other thing that he said in that speech was that he talked about the need to establish a Palestinian state. Now, 85% of Palestinians, both in the U.S. Supported Palestinian Authority-ruled areas in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, support the atrocities that were perpetrated against the Jewish people on October 7th. And so wherever you look, you're talking about empowering people who want to annihilate the Jews, who over 90% of them said to pollsters that they've never felt more proud of their Palestinian identity than they have since October 7th. So that, lighting entire families on fire and burning them to death makes them proud to be Palestinians. This is something that, we haven't really experienced before at this level and at this level of sympathy for sadism and mass murder and rape and everything else that we experienced that day. So when the Americans wanted, came out very strongly immediately after October 7th, let's give these people a state, and not just any state, a state next to Israel, a state where we already saw what they do with the power that they gain. They commit acts of genocide against the Jewish people. They indoctrinate their children from the age of 0 to seek the annihilation of the Jewish people and to seek to participate in that annihilation. So people didn't want to hear it at the time, but the polls were showing that over 90% of Jews in Israel oppose Palestinian statehood still today after October 7th. I mean, it was already pretty low, the level of support after the Palestinian terror war against Israel in 2000s. But after October 7th, support among Jews for Palestinian statehood has gone down to almost nothing. And here were the Americans coming in and saying the end of this war is to establish a state that's going to be organized around one principle and one principle only, which is the annihilation of Israel. So that was already bad. And since then, we've seen less and less of the hugs and the expressions of empathy or sympathy with us and support for the Jewish people, and slogans that they use, people like James Kirby at the National Security Council, the spokesman there, who says that our security, our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad, sound more and more hollow, less and less meaningful, because the policy and substance never changed. It was always to empower the Palestinians at Israel's expense, and to that end to undermine through things like hectoring, slander, libel, insinuation that we're committing atrocities in Gaza, and also through the demonization of Israelis who oppose the establishment of a two-state solution, first and foremost religious Jews who live in Judea and Samaria, and, other actions like attempting to overthrow the government of Israel, calling for the ouster of our prime minister, who's extremely popular in time of war, and his replacement with people who, towed the Americans' line on the Palestinians. These kinds of actions, we just, they tell us that what we're seeing is lip service. What we're hearing is lip service. We're hearing lip service to an American people who, according to the consistent polling of the American people since October 7th, conducted by Harvard-Harris Polling Institute, you have over 80% of Americans who stand with Israel and support our war aims, support what we're doing, support the elimination of Hamas as a political and military entity. And yet, against the wishes of these 85% of the people of the United States of America, the Biden administration is, through every means possible, military embargo on weapon systems to Israel, denying us basic munitions like tank and artillery shells, Air Force ordnance for our planes. All of these things, the United States, and of course, abstaining from UN Security Council resolutions against us, apparently green lighting actions against our leadership at the International Criminal Court, of which we are not a member, and over Israel, it has no jurisdiction. All of these actions that are being taken by the Biden administration speak to their actual policy, which is to effectively side with Iran and its terror proxies in the war that they're waging to annihilate the Jewish state. And so, we find ourselves in this very strange situation where I would argue that the Israeli people are the most pro-American people in the world in terms of the level, not only of support for the United States, but of love for the American people and the United States of America that is felt by the vast majority of Israelis, the Jews in particular, less so the Arabs. And yet you're seeing a policy on the part of the U.S. government, of the Biden administration, that is antithetical to our existential interest, to our existence, to our survival. Because if we don't win this war, and we can get into this a little bit, our survival will be placed in doubt. I mean, this is not a war that, we can fight to a draw, or we can reach some sort of a peace deal afterwards, that we can appease these people. We saw it October 7th, and in subsequent actions, not only by Hamas, but also by the Palestinian Authority, which, we don't have a partner for peace. We have this group of people call themselves Palestinians who live amongst us, and they define themselves as everything that we're not. They define themselves as our enemy on all 360 degrees. Everything that we are, they negate. They're stealing our history. They're denying we have a history. They're stealing our birthright and telling us that we're colonialist interlopers from Europe. I mean, all kinds of things that are just absurd, and yet they're getting away with it in the international community because you have an American administration who apparently supports these lies.
Let's talk about the comparison between, the attacks on Bibi and his administration and the attacks on Trump and his administration. There seems to be a parallel. There's all of these riots, these rallies that are going on, calling for both of them to be removed from office. Even Bibi being accused because of October 7th. He should have, he knew he had information. He knew that this was going on, and he didn't initiate contact with the terrorists immediately. He waited hours. I mean, this is what's floating around out there. Is there what's the issue with these two leaders being attacked similarly? And was Bibi aware of what was going on when October 7th happened? Now, almost to me feels like gold in my ear. Somebody knew and somebody didn't tell him, and it was a Yom Kippur all over again.
And it was on Simchat Torah. So Netanyahu, we've gotten bits and pieces of the information of the puzzle about how it happened that we were caught unawares. And essentially, what we know for certain is that our general staff knew what was being planned by Hamas. They had Hamas's operational plans for invading Israel and taking mass numbers of Israelis as hostages and overrunning, they thought, one or two bases or communities. And they did not report any of this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, none. They didn't, and that was in the year before October 7th, when they first got word of Hamas's operational plan, which the IDF referred to as the walls of Jericho. That was how they called Hamas's plans, which was very similar because they did just walk right through the security fence and security wall that we built on the perimeter with Gaza. They blew it up. They used bulldozers to take it down. Who would have thought of it, right? And they had the information about it a year ahead of time, and they did not warn the prime minister. And then on the night between October 6th and October 7th, they had information beginning at midnight that Hamas leaders had gone to ground under the tunnels, that they were activating thousands of Israeli SIM cards that they had there, and then later that they were moving towards the border. And so these were alerts that they received at midnight and that they received at 4 o'clock in the morning. The invasion began at 6:30, and nobody told the prime minister. My family, we were on vacation in the Golan Heights during the holidays, a holiday of Sukkot, and we went up camping in the north. And Netanyahu and his wife, Sarah, were also staying at a hotel very close to where we were. And he got a security briefing before he went up on vacation, and they said everything's fine. Hamas is deterred, nothing to worry about. So he was there around the same time we were. We know because the protesters drove from Tel Aviv to the Golan Heights to try to ruin his vacation. And we heard them protesting from where we were on an opposite mountaintop He had gotten the all clear to go on vacation, and he came home. And then the night of the invasion, nobody alerted him. They had two secure calls, conference calls with the heads of our security services, the head of the Shin Bet, the chief of staff of the army, head of intelligence, head of Southern Command. And they did not inform either the defense minister or the prime minister of Israel that this was happening. So it was the failure of our security chiefs to both to inform the political leadership and also to organize, even in the most basic way, the defenses. They didn't even wake up the guards to be on guard at dawn, so that many of our soldiers were killed in their sleep. And of course, they took our girl soldiers. They massacred the observers who were female soldiers, and the ones that they didn't massacre, they took as hostages to Gaza. There were only 2 survivors of an entire unit. So they disregarded the warnings for over a year and the information that they had for over a year, and then the night before they didn't say anything. So definitely, to the extent that Netanyahu is responsible for what happened on October 7th, it was that he had not drawn in the reins of the military general staff, that they were basically operating as an autonomous regime in Israel and not telling the prime minister. So that's important to know. And as to why, what was preceding it was 4 years in which our attorney general and our legal fraternity, which is a self-appointed and self-perpetuating fraternity of government lawyers and Supreme Court justices who control much of what happens in Israel, together with the general staff of the army, that also perpetuates itself and effectively appoints its own members with very little, if any, political oversight. So we have these 2 nodes of tremendous power in Israel that are controlled by the political left, by progressives, and it's a members-only club. And the government came in with an explicit promise to voters to enact legal reform, to give our political leaders oversight over the court, over the attorney general, so that they could no longer act as autonomous bodies. And they set the country on fire. In the 10 months preceding the Hamas invasion, we had Israel's elites in the media, in academia, in the legal system, and their supporters were on the streets night after night with endless amounts of money to carry out these rallies, block traffic. They captivated the news media, with free advertising essentially this entire time. And what had preceded that was a legal witch hunt against Netanyahu. And so he was indicted on three charges in 2019, right on the eve of an election, with a clear attempt to make him lose. We had 4 inconclusive elections, largely as a result of the prosecution of Netanyahu. So they announced their intention to indict him just before the first round of elections, and then we had 4 that were inconclusive that followed one after the other. His trial began, and all of the charges against him have fallen apart, and they're not canceling the case because the judges are afraid of the lawyers, and the lawyers are insisting on finding him guilty of something, even though the 3 charges that they indicted him with both relate to laws that don't exist. They made up laws in Netanyahu's case, and they thought that they could prove that he had committed these crimes, and all they've shown is that they committed themselves. Their entire criminal proceeding against him was criminal.
It sounds like what they're doing to Donald Trump.
And so at the same time, almost that they began this witch hunt against Netanyahu, Trump came into office, and you saw the whole fake Trump-Russia investigations and allegations began with allegations and insinuations and illegal wiretaps. They did the exact same thing to Netanyahu here. Yes, what we're seeing then in both cases is that you have these elites that have an enormous amount of power. In America, you call them the deep state, that are control of nodes of power inside of a government apparatus that have immunized themselves from political oversight over a period of really decades since the end of the Cold War. And they are trying to do everything that they possibly can to prevent the people's representatives from having any oversight over their operations or changing their operations, as you would expect an elected leader to be able to do in a democracy. So Prime Minister Netanyahu and Trump are sort of both unique in their respective countries, each for their own reason, because the countries are not identical. But Trump was able to get elected against all expectations in 2016 because he was able to speak and connect to large constituencies in the United States that not only are not represented by the deep state, but whose basic values and interests are undermined by their continued power in the United States, whether in national security affairs or in economic affairs or in cultural affairs. And the same thing is true with Netanyahu, because he takes a different view of Israel than the deep state does. He believes in national sovereignty and independence, and because they're tied very much to the deep state in the United States, they want Israel to be completely dependent on the United States strategically in order to advance their own political interests. So we've faced very similar battles in both countries, and it's not surprising that a lot of these forces also drink from the same well in terms of financing and other things. So a lot of I think it just came out in the American media this week that the Pritzker family, which is one of the largest donors to Joe Biden and to Democrats, has been behind a lot of the funding of the anti-government operations. So the demonstrations here, the same is true with George Soros, has also been funding a lot of the operations, the opposition demonstrations here. And obviously in the United States, you have that as well. So, a lot of these are just a handful of multi-billionaires who are funding a lot of chaos and mischief and social programming and other programming in the United States and Israel and in other countries in the Western world to advance an agenda that the vast majority of the people in Israel, whether, like I said, it was a Palestinian state or the United States, on a whole slew of issues from immigration to gender engineering and other things, are completely rejected by the vast majority of Americans.
Yeah, it's shocking to see the similarities of what both of our countries are dealing with, and this deep state that is involved, entrenched in trying to control world governments, especially what I consider the two most powerful, Israel and the United States of America. So, it brings to mind another issue that comes up. And one of the issues that I hear from people, and these are conservative groups that I speak to. And one of the things they'll bring up is the whole issue with COVID and Pfizer, and basically using Israel as the petri dish to be able to exploit what they were doing. They convinced the population that a large number of people were getting the COVID shot, believing that this was the important thing to do. Can you elaborate on what happened? And because there was also a time when there was like a card that they were like a vax card that people would, carry around like a passport to show that, they had been vaccinated. What is the correlation between Pfizer and what happened with the government?
I don't think that in Israel, in the case of Israel, there is one. I think that here you just have a cultural disparity in terms of how Americans and Israelis see medicine and government's role in medicine. And I also think that a lot had to do with a sense of who is making the decisions and whether you have trust in the authorities that are making them or not. Israel has socialized medicine, and it works very well here. We have an excellent medical system, and it certainly works better than the hybrid system that you have in the United States. American medical system was fantastic when it was private because it suited the cultural DNA of the American people. You have a very vast population that's very disparate, that's very different You have different kinds of medical needs in different places. You have different, some places are high density populations, some are very, dispersed, with small populations over mass territory, so that, when the medical system in the United States developed organically, it was best suited for the American people. But what happened with Obamacare, and less so, but still importantly with Medicare over the years, is that the medical system in the United States became increasingly centralized. And obviously it was on steroids with Obamacare in terms of speeding up a process. But you can't really have an all, one-size-fits-all medical system in the United States and have it work. And that's why people are so unhappy on all sides of the debate over the nature of American medical system today and medical care that people receive. Because trying to do centralized medical care in a country as different and as vast as the United States is a recipe for disaster. In Israel, it's very different because we have a small population, relatively highly educated, relatively similarly educated because it's a small population, and we have a national public system of education as opposed to a state or local system of public education. So we have a very good centralized medical system. And so when COVID arrived, the expectation was that the government was going to take care of it because that's how things have always worked here, and they've worked well. But again, then it became used, Israel's sort of natural cultural inclination towards expecting the health ministry to figure out how to handle something, put us at loggerheads with the American mindset. And so, we have very similar mindsets about a lot of things, and we have similar values in terms of a lot of basic concepts. But in terms of the expectations from governance, because of the different way that we organize ourselves, whether in regard to medicine or to a degree as well on education, although with the progressive infiltration of our education system, we're becoming much more like Americans in terms of our dissatisfaction with what's happening. So I think that set us off on a clash. And obviously, Netanyahu's first inclination was, well, if there's this disease, then let's get a vaccine for it. Let's fix it. So that people can get back to work. You're saying that it's not going to be safe to open up our factories again, to open up our schools again, to open up our society again until, people are free of this vaccine, that this disease that you're telling us is life-threatening is going to stop being infectious. So obviously the same thing that Trump said. We need a vaccine. Yeah. So the inclination was the same, and everybody was in a race to see who was going to get the vaccine first. And so Netanyahu ran to Borrell, I think is his name, the CEO of Pfizer, and he explained how this could work with the Israeli medical system, which is centralized, and why it would work for us and how they could get their vaccine data very quickly, if they used us that way. And there was a sense that we were amazing. Like, we were extremely proud of ourselves that we got to be the first country vaccinated. And then, and there was a lot less doubt among the Israeli people about whether this was the proper course. And obviously this is a big problem because we were faced with something that was totally new. And we just, and it was a massive crisis. Right. And under the circumstances, you have this idea, well, the experts are going to lead and they know the best because this isn't a political issue. This is just medical issue. And if the medical science is telling you that this works, then let's just do it. And, that there were questions about it that were big that people weren't answering. In my case, as a mother of two sons in school, young school age kids at that time in elementary school, I was most worried about the issue of the heart muscle. And they were saying that there was this infection and it could really kill young boys if they took it. And so I was, so my reticence about giving them the vaccine owed to that. And then people were all saying, there's not a problem, there is a problem, there's not a problem, there is a problem. So in the end, I was very happy because my older son got COVID. And just as he was supposed to get the vaccine, he was in 7th grade at the time. And so I said, great. And so I sat him next to his younger brother, and I told his younger brother to eat all of his food and that they weren't allowed to leave one another's side until they both had COVID. Right. And that's how we got over the need to give them vaccines. So for us, it was like, how do we deal with this as a family? But there was never this sense that somebody was trying to hurt us the way that there was in America. And then I know that the Americans, they took this thing that we thought we were proud of, that we were getting the vaccine, we were getting out of COVID, we were going to be free first, we were going to be able to open up our economy first, without that kind of suspicion of authority that was healthy, particularly in retrospect in relation to COVID. And they were like, why are the Israelis hiding on to this big pharma thing? But it was a very innocent move on the part of the Israeli people. Like, it was just that we were naive, and I think in retrospect we were manipulated a lot, especially when they were telling us that pregnant women had to get the vaccine, and the children who were born from mothers with vaccines, I think, tended to be underweight or have issues with different like milk and things like that you didn't see in populations that weren't where the mothers weren't vaccinated. But there was so much uncertainty at the time that people aren't even really mad about it in retrospect, because it's sort of like, so I think there was a big cultural rift, particularly between the evangelicals of the United States, and most Israelis aren't even aware of it. That most Israelis have no idea that our good friends in the United States were angry with us, because here it wasn't
a whole different mindset because you guys were used to.
We never occurred to us that we were supposed to suspend judgment about a lot of things. We just sort of accepted, what we were told. There were very few people on the margins of society who were saying this is terrible, and they were really mad at Netanyahu. But it never got a lot of traction, even amongst Netanyahu's greatest haters, because there's just this cultural. We're much more centrally organized society culturally because we're Jews, right. So we're overwhelmingly Jewish. So the sense is just the suspicion of authority on this basic issue of public health really just didn't exist here. Right. So I think I was taken very much by surprise, and I consider myself a very good cultural bridge between Israelis and Americans, with a level of hostility that Americans felt towards Fauci and towards everyone. It was only after several months of the pandemic that we even understood that there was a big fight going on, and in the meantime, a lot of our very good friends in America had gotten very angry with us, and we didn't even know what we were like, how we were even supposed to have a conversation about it. So it was one of those things, that sort of cultivated an atmosphere of suspicion that was never really discussed, and therefore not really understood by Israelis, and I think also by Americans who didn't understand where Israelis were coming from. We got a lot of, why are you pushing big pharma? What's your inside track here? And there was no inside track. It was just a different way of looking at the same phenomenon.
So tell me, let's move on to education, because we spoke with Itamar earlier about the propaganda in textbooks, and in the United States we see this indoctrination going on. We've seen it for over a decade, that they're trying to manipulate the younger generation as it's coming up to engage or embrace the mindset of the cultural elite, and so we're watching our children be used as these propaganda guinea pigs, and it's working. I mean, look at what's happening on the college campuses. It's been working. Nobody wanted to pay attention a decade ago when I was like red flagging and saying, hello, we need to pay attention. It was Governor DeSantis who rose up. Is there an issue with propaganda in curriculum in Israel, in the education system?
So first of all, yes, there is. We've been getting, and it's always following on with you, and we get it through grants from progressive NGOs in the United States who work with progressives in our education ministry. And it's all outside of the purview of the parents, so that the parents aren't told about any of this stuff. What happens is that the education ministry has this kind of a basket of educational curriculum that every school principal gets to choose from, different programs for enrichment that aren't part of the regular curriculum. And they work with different NGOs to provide this curriculum. So we have two different, we have more than that, but basically on a large scale for most Jews, we have two different public systems of education. One is secular and one is religious. So like our family goes to religious schools. So they're sort of like American parochial schools, but they're public. So, and then you have the secular. So most of this stuff is happening in the secular school system where people aren't be given religious instruction during the day, and that's left for the home. And so they have they've had a problem with progressive principals taking these curriculum that are provided by progressive NGOs in the United States, many of them funded by the U.S. government, that like democracy education and protecting girls and things like that. And what you find is that they're starting already in some of the public nursery schools to teach gender science, to try to tell 4 and 5-year-old children that they get to choose their gender, and they don't teach the Torah to children, until recently. All school children in Israel, in both tracks, in religious and secular tracks, they learned the entire Jewish Bible, and they learned less prayers, but they learned certainly Jewish history with because our history began with Abraham, and so they would learn Jewish history beginning with the Bible, and they would learn the entire Bible as part of their cultural legacy, and then they stopped teaching children in the secular education system Jewish history. We had a very progressive education minister in the left-wing government that was in Israel for a year and a half during that time that Netanyahu was out in power, and she canceled the history courses in high school and Jewish studies, and so she was there for one school year, and she carried out massive amounts of damage. She brought in all of these progressive NGOs to take over the school system, and because our deep state is all rowing in the same direction, so she gets everything approved immediately, and they start tearing apart our school curriculum. And the first thing that the current education minister did when he came into office was he canceled all of her reforms. But still, you enact something, and then the kids who are in 10th grade and they have to start studying for their college tests and everything, they're already using the curriculum that you just dictated, and then they have to go back and relearn or change or whatever. So, she did that, and that's exactly what they do in America. They come in, they open the borders with, before you can say Jack Robinson, you have 8 million people in the United States who came from God only knows where, because they move very quickly. They come in with all their plans already, and they just start shooting them off as soon as they come in. So that's what happened with us. Yeah. But it's, the Jewish people are not stupid. We didn't come here in order to become citizens of the world. We had that going on for 2,000 years, and it was a disaster. Right. So, that's the same thing with American people. Why is it that they're working so hard to undermine our democratic institutions, the one that are elected? It's because our elected leaders reflect the views and the values of the people who vote them into office. And so the less power they have, the less the people will be able to determine their course. And that's a thing that we need more of. We need more power to democratically elected leaders, because if we don't like them, then we throw them out of power. And if we like them, then we keep them there. So, everything that undermines, obviously you need checks on the powers of our governments, but all we have are checks and limits. And then you have the bureaucracies that have no limits on their power and no checks on their power. And so that has to be, obviously rebalanced in both countries. And the tip of the iceberg of this ongoing war are the legal persecutions of Prime Minister Netanyahu on the one hand and President Trump on the other.
Right. Absolutely. So as we wrap up our interview, is there anything else that came to your mind that you want to say? And, what would you say to Americans? Because, America, the evangelical Christian community is very supportive of this administration, the prime minister. We see it as a witch hunt that he's going under, or they're going after him just like they're doing to Trump. What would you want to communicate to the American people about the importance of this strong relationship that our two countries, despite the different administrations and their policies that were anti-Israel, what would you say to the people of America about the importance of this relationship that we have always had since Israel's rebirth as a nation?
So I think it's very important for people to realize that this is also about them. That, this isn't a foreign war happening in some faraway land that doesn't have anything to do with the United States. Because we were talking about it on this just over the last Sabbath. I don't know how we got we were always talking about what's happening in America and how Biden is undermining our war effort. So it's just like this, thing that's in the air all the time because people are so upset about it. But, when we're looking at the violence on campus, and who stands behind this? This is Muslim students in America. It's Hatem Bazian, who's the head of Students for Justice in Palestine. And he worked for the Holy Land Trust Foundation, which funded Al-Qaeda, that funded at 9/11, that funds Hamas. These are Hamas front organizations that also work with Al-Qaeda and with ISIS and with all of these groups that declared war against the United States. And they're funding these demonstrations. Soros is funding these demonstrations. The Ford Foundation is funding these demonstrations.
You're talking about demonstrations in America and here in Israel?
In America. And you're looking at this pact, this partnership between the progressives and the Islamists to bring down the United States. And, this is terror money. This is progressive money. That is why all of the messages on every campus, it's pretty amazing, from coast to coast, across the country, over 140 campuses are now on fire with anti-Semitism in the United States. They're also burning the American flag. But then one of the most important things is that they all are doing the exact same thing. The messages are uniform across the board. The tents are uniform. The posters are uniform. The demands are uniform. And it's all being centrally guided. And when they call for death to Israel, they're also burning the flag. They're also calling death for America. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that, because they understand that if the United States loses the Bible, if the United States loses its sense that, it is the new promised land, that, its biblical foundations, its recognition that, that George Washington and the other founding fathers were sort of in the new world, the modern incarnation of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right, and that they were bringing a promise of limited government and freedom through limited government to men and women in the new world, the way that Moses at Mount Sinai with God brought the concept of a divine authority that limited the power of men and kings. That Pharaoh couldn't exist at the same time on an earth that has the presence of God, because Pharaoh considered himself to be all-powerful. And so when you look at the parallels in the founding of the United States and the way that it was inspired by the Bible, and you understand that, then you understand that this effort on the part of the progressives and the Islamists to deny the biblical roots of the people of Israel, of the Jewish people, of the necessity of a Jewish state in our world today, and of the rights of the Jewish people to sovereignty in our land, then you recognize that they're attacking Israel because they understand that we are the little Satan, as Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran said. The United States is the big one. You get to the big one through the little one. You get the United States to think that the Jews have no right to their land. Well, if the Jews are some sort of colonial interlopers from Poland or something like that, then, or Britain, right, or America, and not the native people of this land with a 4,000-year history stretching back to Father Abraham, right here on this land, then what is America doing? Then what's the point of limited government? Then obviously men aren't supposed to be free. They're supposed to be dictated by their betters, how they're supposed to educate their children, how they're supposed to run their wars, how they're supposed to man their borders or not have borders. They're supposed to, are you going to be able to choose how to raise your children, or are you going to be told how to raise your children and sent to jail like happens in Germany if you raised your kids in a way that somebody else doesn't want you to raise them? So, I mean, it sounds almost like chaos theory. Like, how can all of this stuff be related? It's like the butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil, and you're going to get a tsunami in Indonesia. But it's not. It's because freedom is indivisible. And if you think that the Jewish people don't have a right to freedom and that we're actually taking somebody else's land when we're sitting in Jerusalem, then how can you explain Washington? How can you explain Valley Forge? How can you explain the Civil War? How can you explain yourself to yourself? Because if, they all understood, Abraham Lincoln understood, George Washington understood, that they were trying to do something on a grand scale that Moses was delivering to humanity through the Jewish people, and God, obviously, at the center of it all. And so I think, that's a very long-winded explanation. But if, they want to annihilate Israel. We saw it on October 7th. And then, it's not just that they've been saying it. They say it all the time. They say it morning, noon, and night. And they've said it morning, noon, and night since 1948 when Israel was established, and even before that. So they've been saying it forever. They've been waging war against us forever. They've been carrying out terrorist attacks forever. But we saw what it looks like. We saw what the end looks like on October 7th. We got a taste of the end on October 7th. And since then, we've been trying to kill these people and destroy their ability to harm us and destroy their ability to do this again, because they promise that that's what they're going to do. And they promise it on Columbia University campus, the same as they promise it on the streets of Gaza. And so, we're talking about an enemy that shows what he's doing, educates his children to do it. And he's being supported by people in the United States and in Europe and throughout the world who don't want us to be able to see reality for what it is. They don't want us to be able to have faith in our God because they understand that limits their power. And so I think that here is the battle for civilization. It's happening here. And, I know that Christians support Israel. We get it in the polls, and I feel it in my bones. But I think the most important thing that Christians can do today to defend themselves, to defend their way of life, is to stand with Israel and to do it as loudly as possible. And, you've got great people in the United States who are working on that. People like you, people like Patricia Heaton, who was on my podcast a couple months ago. She's Catholic, and she's been doing amazing. She started the October 7th Coalition of Christians standing with Israel. You've had some great pastors working on this as well. I think it's important at the individual church level, at the individual family level, for people to understand what's the stakes here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been amazing and such great information, Caroline. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And, we're behind you. We solidly support you. Thank you for keeping that message of truth out there for us to be able to know what really is happening, because there's so much information out there, and we know there's a lot of propaganda mixed in. So we've got to kind of get through, and that's why we're here today. That's why I wanted to talk to you to get your perspective. So
it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and really God bless you and all of your viewers. And if anybody wants, to hear from me again, then just go to the Caroline Glick Show, my podcast, and to jns.org, where I'm the senior editor, where I write my stuff.
It's fantastic. Yes, absolutely. So Caroline, thank you so much. Good to see you in Jerusalem.
It was terrific. Welcome back, and come back again soon.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.